Well, good morning, folks. It's 8 o'clock and we're at the intersection. I'm on my phone today, having just a little bit of, again, technology ticks going on. But I can still see you and I can still talk with you and enjoy this morning with you. So looking forward to this morning. Big announcement that we've been pumping, and I'm going to say it again, but this Saturday is the March Sacred Action Lab. It's 9 to noon, and it's at UT Health. And we'll put in chat the registration link so you can still register. We've got lots of people coming. I think we've broke the 100 mark, and so that's good. But it's on intellectual and developmental disabilities and resourcing and how to do that. Again, it's out at UT Health. So we've got some really strong panels coming, no cost to you. If you go to the link, you'll also find the map and parking. And there will be coffee and tacos. And so it should be a really good action lab. Not that they all aren't good, but UT Health did a lot in putting this action lab together. So bringing you the very best we can in this sacred effort. So I hope you consider coming. It's on a Saturday. We're trying to rotate everything, both the action labs and roundtables. Our consistent time is Thursday mornings, 8 to 8:30. So that's kind of our consistent thread in what we're calling this action lab process. Where on odd number months, which we're in, we get a 3-hour in-person content rich, but also all those other things that you can get of connections with other people. We've got lots of tabling going on. So on the odd number of months, we get content rich, but still you get all that connectivity and relationships, and we're in person. And then in between, every Thursday we have at the intersection, where we bring some more content, but things that are happening, also process and learning together, which we've been doing now for years in terms of the importance of collaboration and bringing compassion into the world. And then on the even months, so this last February, we had our roundtable, and in April, we'll also have a roundtable. It too is in person, so it gives us these in-person moments, but it's 90 minutes and a time for all of us to report in, catch up, learn more about the action that each of us are taking. When we met in February, and at the end of the process, we heard about action plans in the participants, and we had cheering and clapping going on for action plans that the rest of us might not have had anything to do with, right? But we were all excited about what we were doing collaboratively throughout the city and bringing action into the world. And then after that, we'll have some more intersection. And then in May, we will have another content rich in-person 3-hour action lab. So that's kind of the process that we're in, and repeating it so that we all learn together. It's a great way to also build the work that we're doing on a collective level. So to get more leverage and potential out there. I think we have time for another announcement. If there are any out there that someone would like to share. If not, then we're going to jump into hearing some news from Doug on how NAMI went about finding the new executive director. We met Lauren last week, which was great. And if you weren't with us last week and want to meet Lauren, of course, you can always go to Sacred at the intersection, and all of our times together recorded. So you can go in for 10, 15 minutes and you'll get to meet Lauren. And that's what's great about these recordings. So if this process today, for example, rings true for you, you can also take today's recording and show it to others, because that's what I'm planning to do. I already have a list of people that I'm sending it to and hoping that they will take note of the importance of this process. So to move forward, there was one thing, and it's probably, I know there was more than one, but there was one significant piece of wisdom that many of us learned it when we were serving at Haven for Hope when it was first opening, which was kind of a trip in the opening of it. But we definitely experienced it, and it was such important wisdom. And Doug is bringing an example to us today of that wisdom. So it goes something like this: to take the time in the front of things, not too much time, but to take the time and invest in the short run looks like it's too long. This is going to be a little philosophical today. But in the long run, it's the shortest path to where we want to go. We found that out because we kept kind of repeating the cycle, because we tried something and it didn't work, and then we would quickly try to figure out what to do next, and then it didn't work. We had a big project, right? And we weren't taking time at the beginning, really investing the time to discern what we needed in the long run. So the upfront planning wasn't long enough, but we didn't want to do it. We wanted to go short and make it happen. And I tend to do that. But if you invest at the beginning, in the long run, it's the shortest route to where you want to be. So with that, Doug is going to share with us the process that NAMI used to find their new executive director, and to encourage all of us to take the time we need, not get stuck there, but to move forward. So Doug, I want to hand it over to you, and I'm excited to hear about this process.
I couldn't say what Ann said better. And when you talk about thinking ahead, is not to, I think most public companies, for example, and large organizations have to do this because they have outside shareholders, they have stakeholders, investors, community partners who really demand that if they're going to devote resources and give resources or give money, they want to know that you know where you're going and what you're going to do, and what's going to happen if somebody if a key person leaves or falls out. And I think to underscore that, you can't afford to get it wrong, because if you make a mistake in picking the next leader, then many times it takes years to kind of dig your way back out of that. When you make a mistake, it doesn't mean that this is perfect, but it helps you improve the odds on finding the right leadership. Couple comments. One, there are different starting points for organizations. I think we chose to do it one way, which was to look ahead. But a lot of times an organization will find itself all of a sudden a key person drops out, isn't available. There can be a crisis in the organization. So I don't know that any of what I'm going to say really does not apply in those cases. I know of two organizations within NAMI that are going through kind of this, what I would call the crisis. And in one case, they didn't plan ahead, and they're really having to repeat what they should have done several years ago. Billy mentioned early before we got on about the importance of thinking about internal candidates, and I agree. So you may have, so this does not mean that there aren't people in the organization currently that might not be a good fit. I think a lot of times there's not as thorough a process, because you think that, well, we've got a person on board, but it doesn't mean that they're the right person, or it doesn't mean they're at the right point in their career. And again, it helps to think through this up front. And I think it gives every organization sort of a foundation to stand on as to why they make the decision they make. Billy, if you want to put up that slide, the first one, the outline, I'm going to talk through some points real quickly. And I hope everybody can see this. As I thought about the process, it really, and I call this finding Waldo, what's next? And this is the process you start really at any point in time thinking through your organization. And so the first thing to do, I think, is, and where we started, was building a culture. I call it preparing the soil. And that's where you do an organizational assessment. What does your organization look like? You know, what's the nature of the organization? How healthy is that? And I think at the same time, from my personal standpoint, and this is part of the discussion, is if you have somebody in as a CEO or an executive director, I think it's important for that person to periodically sit down and do their own personal assessment. Nobody lasts forever. And I think a good board will have that conversation with an executive director and and ask that question, you know, what's on your mind? What do you see in your future? What are your plans? So again, you don't get surprised, but it also forces the executive director to really kind of think through where they are and where they're going, and is this do they want to continue to do the job they're doing? And is this the right time to be thinking about a transition? I think in terms of preparing the soil, I think you want to include the board and the staff as you get into this. It's really important. And the third point there is you have to build a board. I think the situation that I can think of right now where things have not gone well in succession planning is where the board dropped their responsibility. They really weren't doing the job they should be doing. So this assessment also includes an assessment of your board and what kind of job they're doing. I think the fourth point here is having a strategic plan. It's pretty hard to go through a process of finding a new leader if you don't have a strategic plan. And even if it's not perfect, if it's not, maybe it needs to be updated, but you have to have a plan. You have to know where you're going. Any good candidate that you're looking at is going to want to see the plan and know kind of what your vision of the future is. And I'm going to show you a document that will help give a better definition for what I'm talking about. I think the other thing in terms of preparing the soil is as you look at your own organization, it's knowing what your organizational norms and values are. And it's having some organizational clarity, having a good organization chart and clarity about what positions are there, what roles and responsibilities people have. So that, and again, anybody that comes in from the outside needs to have a pretty clear picture as to how things are organized and who does what. So those are all things that that I think you do up front, way ahead of time. And if you do those things well, and you do them up front, you're going to be much better prepared to go through this process. So when Ann started talking about taking the time up front, it really begins way before you actually begin a search process and a succession process. I think one other thing Ann mentioned was, you know, we went through, and I was involved with NAMI for at least 15 years. And over the years, you know, we tried different things. And I think in the end, you learn that just exactly as Ann said, you learn that it's much better to go ahead and work on this ahead of time, be planning for it, and do that organizational assessment, have the right board in place, and then your chances for success are much, much better. The second point here, and many of you may have already heard this in one place or another, but the CEO at NAMI likes to use this one a lot. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And this may be the crux of the whole issue, of the whole process, because it really is about building the team organizationally, internally, including the board and the staff, and working together, being in sync, so that as you do the process, everybody's on the same page. Everybody has a clear vision of where you're headed. I don't know that I could say that any better. The couple of things that I like to throw in this regard is that I always say, championship teams play together. They play for one another. They're not 12 or they're not 5 or 12 players who are great superstars and play independently. Most people can see time and time again that doesn't work out that well. But the teams that play together, and when you ask people, how did you win that championship? They're saying, yeah, I played for the guy next to me. I played for the people I care about. And caring about people in your organization, and I mean really caring about them and being compassionate, is really key, because that forms the foundation for bringing somebody else into your organization. And along those lines, I also think great players make others around them better. And I think that whether you're evaluating somebody inside your organization or outside, one of the questions you always want to ask is, well, how were the people, not just how did they do, how did the candidate do, or how did whether internal or external, but how did the other people around them do? Were they able to do better because of the person that was leading? I think one of the other lessons along the way here in preparing the soil and working as a team is, I think when you do this, you also begin to identify who your nonconformist and your outliers are. When you have people in your organization that haven't really bought in to where you're going and working with each other and being a team, it tears the team apart. It just doesn't work. And you have to make those changes along the way if you're going to build a healthy organization. And that's a lot of what this is about, building a healthy organization so that as you go through the succession process, you have a good organization for somebody to come to. The third point is succession planning, finding the next leader. So the first thing I thought of in this regard was pick your transition points. Don't let the circumstances control you. Control your circumstances. Pick your transition points. So probably anywhere from 3 to 5 years ago, I knew what the plan looked like in my own mind. I knew where the transition could occur, and I knew what had to be done to be able to prepare us for the transition. So in my own mind, I had a timeline, and I made a decision at least a year ahead of time, specifically that I was going to wanted to talk to our board about making a transition, and begin to work with the board president and people on the board with what this might look like and how we might go about it. But I had already been doing the planning ahead of that time. So again, I think one of the important points here is having that conversation with your board on an ongoing basis, so that when you get to the point where you say, well, now's the time we're going to start the process, then you've already prepared a lot of the things that need to be in place. And, you know, I took a year, or gave us a year, and my board said, well, when do you want to leave? And I said, I don't have a time. I don't, you know, it's not March 15th. It's not July 15th. It's not a particular date. It's when we have the right person. Well, are you willing to work on a transition? Definitely, you know, work on. Those are the kind of discussions that you need to have as you get into this process. So picking your transition point when you want this to take place. Um, the next item is really don't be afraid to get outside help. And what we did is we turned to somebody, a consulting firm outside of NAMI that works with boards. And I wanted to use somebody to help the board stay on track, to help the board go through the process, to help them do the work they needed to do. It's a lot of work for a board to go through this process. I think as we got into this, it was really beginning to interview stakeholders, community partners, staff, listening, building a message and communicating and creating visibility. And Billy, would you put up the opportunity profile? So one of the things that we did was we, with the help of the consultant, he developed after helping do interviews and looking at the organization. Is that going to work, Billy? There we go. So we developed what he called an opportunity profile. So it was an overview of the organization. If you want to scroll down. So it told, you know, about us, what our norms and our values were. Go ahead and keep going. Let's see what's down. Describe the position and the organization. Keep going. Talked about what an ideal candidate would look like. What are the qualifications? You can keep going, Billy. And talked about the culture of the organization. And I think you can go ahead and go back to the main slide. So if there's nothing else we talk about here this morning, go ahead and take the opportunity profile down. If there's nothing else we talk about this morning, then this point I think is key, and many of you will say, well, that's, you know, not big news, Doug. It's the fit. Because what you really want is you want a leader who is a good fit in the organization and who is that team player who can help create a healthy organization. And one of the things that does is, and I think many times businesses and organizations, they look for that, the savior, the person that's going to come in and make it all right. And it's pretty hard for one person to do everything and to do everything extremely well. So in the end, being able to find the right fit organizationally is probably the biggest single issue. If you go through the process correctly, you'll have some good candidates. On number 4, let the board lead, forming a succession committee. So you've got the opportunity profile, you've got a succession committee, you've got somebody to work with, and you go through the process. And we were fortunate to have 80 different applicants, but it took a lot of work for the board, for the succession committee to go through those and to begin to identify the key people. And one of the things that our consultant told us was, you know, don't necessarily look for somebody whose resume matches up, you know, item for item as to what you think that job should be or what the traditional candidate would look like. And I think that was really, really good advice. So let me jump to number 5, because number 4 really is taking the candidates, vetting them, interviewing them, getting a final three or four down, interviewing them with both the board and your staff. And one of our board members said that he had been in the corporate world, and he had done many searches for people and hired outside firms, but he had never been through a process that was as good as this. And part of that was because of the amount of time the board took and invested in this. And they will tell you today it was a lot of time. But I think the proof is in the pudding here. On the transition, number 5, I think one of the keys that you need to an organization needs to think about is how do you make the transition so that it's not disruptive, but it has a feel for it, that it is a transition. You know, it's a passage, and it's not an end. And I think that's very important for the staff that are there. Hopefully along the way, they've been engaged and they've had a chance to express their opinion, and they've been part of the process. So those are the main, that's my story. You can take this down. And there were some things I wrote here at the end. What to do when you get surprised by a sudden departure. And I don't think the steps are any different. I think you have to stop and assess, maybe more so than otherwise. You need to get some you need to get some help. You need to consider some interim leadership, and many organizations often look to a board member to step in where there's a vacancy on an interim basis. But I think also it gives the organization time maybe to correct some of the issues that organizationally they were deficient in, shoring up their organization and working with their staff and their board. So, and I think maybe the bottom line here is oftentimes there are not a lot of shortcuts. You know, you really have to work the process, and in the end, you're really looking for a leader that's a good fit, and one that is going to make, as I said, you know, make the other people around them better players. In the end, that's really a test of a good leader. That's what I had to say this morning. Lauren's on here. I mean, you ought to ask her, you know, how the process went.
Well, and I think that's what we're going to do. We're going to open this up to lots of conversation. One first thing, though, that I think of is this applies, I think, to volunteer organizations as well. We may think, you know, like kind of ad hoc collaboratives, and they're not ad hoc. We've been forming community collaboratives now for at least a decade, 3 decades, right? And even if people have jobs in those collaboratives, it's still can be a volunteer process. So this applies there as well, the careful thought and looking at it and preparing always ahead. Before we go any further, I noticed that we're at 8:29. And so if anyone needs to leave at this point, thank you, Doug, for kind of giving us the meat of that. I remind everybody that you can utilize these recordings for your own process to have those kind of conversations with your boards. And so you've got kind of a witness here. Doug is our witness this morning, as are others in the NAMI process of how it went. And sometimes we need that, right? With boards and organizations, you know, we need to take the time and to be able to think about, you know, the greater good in the process. I appreciate, Doug, that you brought up the whole caring. People involved really need to care about what is happening and the work, and then what does that kind of call forward, you know? So those who need to depart, thanks for being with us. We're going to hear next Thursday from Melanie Grenz. She's with the Center on Brain Injury, fits right in with this Saturday's Action Lab. And I'm going to put that link again into chat. I hope to see you all there, 9 to noon out at UT Health. But Melanie will be with us next week, kind of in follow-up to the Action Lab and moving us forward. I think, Doug, that our May Action Lab is going to be on mental health. May is mental health month. So if I remember correctly, we're constantly working on these action labs and roundtables. So let's move forward and open up some conversation. Did you say Lauren was with us?
Yes.
Lauren, do you want to tell us from your perspective what this process was like and what was the process like for you from the other side?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
I can do, yes.
Okay, great. I don't want to repeat anything Doug said. I will tell you from the candidate perspective, I think the thing that was so important and about this process and really successful was my ability to see the board's investment. And that's important, I think, as a new leader coming in to be able to see upfront what the level of involvement and support from the board would be. In moving the organization forward. And so it gave me great comfort and security and seeing the level of work, because like Doug said, it was a lot of work. And I feel like especially the board president who is leading the secession committee, it was probably a full-time job for her for a bit of time, especially as much as I engaged with her through the process. And I know that she engaged with multiple candidates like that through the process. And so there was a true commitment from the board, and I could see that early on, which made me want to continue to move forward in the application and candidate process. And it's bared out today, now being in the seat. But I think that in and of itself is a recruiting tool, is when you see how invested the board is in the organization and making sure that it's the right leader for the organization at the time of the transition. It really helped encourage me to continue in the process.
That's good to hear, right? It was processed good on both directions. Are there questions or thoughts out there for those who've been listening in this conversation?
Hey, Anne, this is Liz. Doug, thank
Hey,
you
Liz.
so much for presenting that to us today. I think it's really, it's a really good use and a tool. Doug knows our history at the collaborative, and much like what he was discussing, doing national searches and then also pairing that with local interest is very, very much key. I think the one thing that I really love about this too is the inclusiveness of ensuring that you have team feedback about, the leadership. That tells a story in and of itself, because when you have an engaged team, the successor really is much more involved, and also, of course, ensures success in transition. So thank you, Doug, for sharing today. I definitely took a lot of notes and looking forward to the to the recording, and so that I could also share it internally. I appreciate that.
Right. I remember in my late 20s, one of the first jobs that I had, my supervisor told me, the sign of great leadership is that the leadership is always searching for the new leadership, recognizing that, we all only have today, right? So always be working towards that next round, and not that it even has a beginning or ending point. It's kind of an evolutionary process. Has its own kind of organic nature, but that intentional planting and working at it, and that's part of the strategy always. And it does make me think, but I didn't have that much control, but it does make me think about my position with the city and how that's kind of on a somewhat permanent pause. Makes me sad in one sense of it not moving on, but large systems are a difficult place, right? And And we're all working for, at least here at the intersection, and everybody who's in this time together, we're working for, a better world, a greater world, greater good. And so it becomes even more important in all the things that we do, that we're being that mindful in the process. So because what we do here does impact the larger system. And I am more than convinced that, that unique nature of San Antonio that we all point to and all feel has a lot to do with the fact that the many of us are doing this kind of work out there, that doesn't just rely on one system, but that we're doing this work together, and building relationship on a systemic level. Any other thoughts or questions? There don't have to be, but any more thoughts or questions out there? Well, if not,
And
yes,
I'll
sir.
just one last point.
Good.
I was very, very upfront with our staff that I was going to announce or I was going to transition, and we were going to look for a new leader. And I think that's another important part of the process, is not surprising everybody, and that makes it more inclusive. But that was a big concern for most organizations. They being open, honest, and communicating well.
Mm. And we find that sometimes hard to do, right? Being
Yeah.
open and honest. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, but the greater good takes the good of all of us to make that happen. So we've got to be strong enough, to be able to be that honest. And because that's not about us in one sense, but it does depend on us. But it's about something, legacy, what's really needed in the world. So thank you, Doug, for all the work you do.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone who's been with us this morning. And I hope to see you at the Sacred Action Lab on Saturday out at UT Health, and to see you next week at the intersection. Y'all have good days.
Thank you.
Thank you.